are down to the last week and a half before the election, and I'm so excited to be talking to these two guys about it. So first, I want to welcome Kyle, representing the Libertarian side. Great to have you back, Kyle. How you doing, buddy?
Thanks, man. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing good, doing good. And then I've got Chris here representing the liberal side. Chris, how you doing, brother?
Doing really well. I've got my Biden-Harris campaign sign that came in recently. I got a Biden-Harris bumper sticker that I put on my car yesterday, and I've already had somebody stop me in traffic at a stoplight and roll down their window. And at first I thought that they were going to verbally assault me, but they just asked where I got the bumper sticker. So I told them it was from the official campaign website, and they smiled and put a thumbs up and then rolled their windows back up. So that was successful interaction.
Well, see, that's in California. If you come out where I live in Northwest Florida, I think the reaction might be a little bit different out here. I mean, that's a good way to kick it off, man. As we talk about all the campaigning that's going on and the polarization. But I'm always happy to have this discussion because I know we're gonna exchange our perspectives and be civil and all that stuff. There's no fear of any type of repercussions with us, but yeah, how about you, Kyle? Are you out there campaigning for Jorgensen, or have you got your Trump stuff up?
No, definitely not campaigning for Jorgensen. No, she's not a very good choice in my opinion.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Also, not really campaigning for Trump. If I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to vote for him or not, but I'm definitely not voting for Joe. Definitely not voting for the other Joe, I guess. Not voting for either of the Joes.
Yeah.
And kind of out on Trump right now, but we'll see how things shake out over the next week.
Down
Not
here in
feeling a
Florida,
shred of momentum at all.
yeah. Down here in Florida, there are entire convoys, boat convoys that go by our house, with, Trump flags and everything else.
Oh, yeah.
It's definitely his country here. But we're gonna get into the reality of it because you can see all that stuff and you be like, oh, okay, he's gonna win. But you go to another spot and it's not like that at all. So the country's really divided on this. We're going to get into the polling numbers and get your latest perspectives. I do want to talk first about the debate, though. So we just had the second and final debate between the two candidates. And man, I couldn't be more surprised at how different it was than the first one. Especially with Trump, it was like a different person. So what did you see it that way, Chris, or was he the same old Trump to you?
No, absolutely. I will say it was the first real event in this campaign cycle that has actually made me a little bit nervous because I do think there are a lot of voters in this election who are really looking for a strong reason to vote for Trump. And I think there are a lot of people who have really been looking for him to moderate his tone and just waiting for him to act more presidential to give them the kind of permission structure that would, justify that vote. And I think he came very close to giving them that at this debate, especially in the first 15 minutes. He was on his best behavior. He had clearly taken some notes on how to do better in this debate, and he went in with the lowest of expectations. There were many who thought that he would perform even worse at this debate and just have some kind of outburst about being muted. Now, he didn't manage to necessarily stay on message or sustain that diplomatic tone throughout the entire debate. He did, at times allude to the Hunter Biden issue. And of course, this week, just today, the 60 Minutes interview dropped where he, storms out and whines about unfair, tough questions. But I do think it was definitely one of his better performances,
Yeah,
especially given the very low standards that he set for himself in the past.
right. John and I talked about this on Conservatism on Tap the other day, but I mean, that's kind of what you look for is a candidate and a leader who will accept feedback and will change and respond based upon what's needed. And there was just universal disgust with his performance the first time, even from his base. And yet in this one, it's just very different. I mean, he even thanked the moderator halfway through and was kind to her, which I appreciate, because she was very professional, I thought. And then you would just expect someone who has achieved many of his goals in his first presidency, to be confident about it. And when he didn't let Biden respond at all, in either debate, like, it makes him seem like he's insecure. So, and this one, very different. And then you mentioned how there were times that he did interrupt and stuff, but like in my mind, there was a couple points where that was actually effective when he was kind of like hitting Biden on the immigration issue and the cages, and he was kind of playing that up and stuff and trying to talk about, oh, this is why people don't want to vote for a politician because they give these prescripted answers and whatnot. So like he was still himself in many ways, but a little bit more tactical, a little bit more purposeful. At least that's what I saw. How about you, Kyle?
Yeah, this has been the story about Trump since he took office, even since before he took office, is that if he could just exhibit just the slightest bit of discipline, the guy would be nearly unstoppable, right? Instead of, just letting him run free with his Twitter account, he digs himself into a hole every other day. But if he could show just the slightest bit of control over his Twitter, over his just general bombasticness, I think that really the sky was the limit for him, and we saw that on display at the debate the other night, where he was a little more reserved. He stayed disciplined, and like you said, I think he really nailed Biden on some really important issues. Definitely took the Hunter Biden thing, I think, a little too far, or was at least not specific enough with it. I actually personally believe that there's a real story there. I think the evidence supports that, but I would say the average viewer is not informed enough, especially now that we know that big tech has been censoring that story. The average voter didn't know enough about that to really understand the meat of that story.
Yeah.
But really, like he said towards the end, he said, "I'm not a politician, right? Politicians give these prescribed answers. I'm not a politician, and you're the reason I ran, Joe." I thought that was really effective.
Yeah, I did too. And the other thing is, I thought Biden was very ineffective. And I think, one of the things that so many conservatives were saying in the first debate was, you got to let Biden essentially hang himself, prove that he isn't who he used to be in terms of his capacity to debate and lead. And to me, that was on display. I don't know what you saw, Chris, but there were so many times. I think I literally stopped the debate. Like, I paused my TV at one point with my wife, and I was just like, what is this guy saying? There's so many better answers, especially with COVID, as it seemed like he was so timid and fearful. And I know so many people have struggled with COVID-19, and there's so much loss with this. But then at the same time, there is reason for hope, and I just don't know if Biden was tapping into that, and like a message of fear is just not going to work in my mind. But did you see anything from Biden that gives you hope, for the ticket, Chris? Given that you're out there campaigning for him every day.
Yeah, he definitely, to use Trump's parlance, started out the debate very low energy. And he definitely, his message at the beginning was very dark and a little pessimistic. And, he may have been giving a lot of facts about the danger of COVID, but Trump was telling people what they wanted to hear. And so I do think that made me a little bit nervous, because
Yeah.
telling people what they want to hear often is a lot more effective than telling the truth. But I do think Biden also could have, as you say, tapped a little bit more into hope and positivity, and the idea that we can get through this together if we listen to the science and follow the recommendations that have been given. I think there were times that he did that, and I think he got better as the debate went on. He had some pretty good lines and rebuttals. But yeah, the first 20 minutes was a little grim for me, a little
Yeah.
dark, especially me just trying to picture how it would come across to a voter who maybe isn't all that informed, who maybe hasn't been keeping up with the race, who maybe this is the first debate they've watched, and they saw Trump looking very confident, more dignified than he has in the past, and giving a fairly positive, if inaccurate, message.
Yeah. But see, so here's the question, and you can see it right below me here, because I asked it for our, on our Facebook page, is given that Trump had a strong debate last night, we obviously know he didn't on the first one, but he had a strong one here. I think we all agree on that. Here's the big question, though. Will it be enough to win him the election? Will it be enough to affect the election in his favor? Because as we know, he's got a pretty steep climb to make, but we're starting to see evidence that's certainly more possible than it was before. But there's still polls that are coming in this week. There's people obviously who have voted. Over 50 million, I think, have voted. But there's still so many states that are within the margin of error. And I just want to go through this real quickly and then start getting your thoughts on it. As you look here, we kind of follow this all the time on our shows. And you can see with these battleground states listed on the left with their electoral votes right there in parentheses, you can see with the bold where Biden is winning and where Trump is winning. Right now, Trump's only winning a couple of these states, Ohio, and then way down there at the bottom, Texas. Okay, but you look at the state of polling 4 years ago, a couple columns over, and you can see where Hillary was right before the election, and then how Trump turned so many things that were different than what the polls predicted. You can see that in Wisconsin, especially. You can see that in North Carolina. Trump won pretty handedly there relative to the polling. Obviously, he barely won in Florida. He won significantly in Georgia. Going all the way down, Trump won almost all of these states, save for Minnesota and Nevada. So now we look at Biden, and that's the question is this enough to affect this? Are we going to see this Trump result, even though the polls predicted Clinton, happen with Biden too? As you see in Wisconsin, he's actually got less of a lead than Clinton did. He's at 4.6. She was at 6.2 in terms of the RCP average. There's the same in Minnesota, North Carolina. Biden's got less of a lead than Clinton had. He's got a little bit more in Florida. He's doing relatively well in Georgia, but still within the margin of error. So, we can spend quite a bit of time on this, but I'm just curious with you guys is like for you, Kyle, you had predicted for a long time that Trump's going to win this election and even the popular vote. Was this third debate the turning point for that for you, or something else?
No, I don't think it was a turning point, but I think it does reinforce some of those predictions I made, especially towards the end of the debate when he was really able to hammer Joe Biden about fracking, about coal, about fossil fuels in general. That is not going to play in Ohio. That's not going to play in Pennsylvania. That's not going to play in Detroit, Michigan. Those are key battleground states that are up for play right now. And Joe definitely gaffed on those, and that's going to play to Trump for sure. I don't know that the whole debate really is going to move the needle that much, but I think that one particular point is going to move it quite a bit, at least in those states.
Yeah, I mean, like those comments on oil, especially. I'll see if I can pull those up here, like his actual quote. But it just seemed like Biden was really at risk of isolating himself from a needed constituency, which is like people who work, in that sector. And sure, everybody wants clean energy and all that kind of thing, but at the expense of losing their jobs, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's not going to play. That's definitely not going to play in Texas. The biggest oil energy area in the world. That's not going to play in West Virginia in the coal mines, in Pennsylvania in the coal mines, and the oil fields of Ohio. And then the one place that really manufactures the automobiles that use all those things in Michigan. That's just losing strategy for sure.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Chris?
So I just saw a poll from CBS News that shows a majority of voters in Pennsylvania actually oppose fracking. So, I think there is a certain degree of, eat your vegetables policy with Democrats once again, where they're not necessarily telling people exactly what they want to hear, but they are still pushing policies that are generally popular and have majority support. Whether that ends up mattering, I think it hinges a lot on voter turnout, which we have seen a lot of this year. There are counties that have already had higher voter turnout so far than in the entire 2016 election. So that doesn't necessarily look good for Republicans, because we know that high voter turnout tends to correlate with Democratic success. So I don't necessarily think the debate was a turning point. As I said before, it did make me a little bit nervous. But, at the same time, the only reason why Donald Trump's performance at this debate is even notable is because his general performance is usually so terrible. So, I think looking at this one isolated event and saying, man, he was really articulate. He didn't insult the moderator. He didn't whine so much. It just kind of puts his usual behavior in stark relief. So yeah, it makes me a little bit worried. But with so many people having already voted, I had already voted before this debate. I think that it's hard to say that anything at this point is going to be a turning point. It's possible that the majority of possible voters in this election have already voted.
Yeah, yeah, that certainly is. I mean, I think the way that so many conservatives see it is they see Trump's results as the biggest factor leading them to vote for his reelection. And I mean, again, living in Trump country, I hear that all the time. Is it's about the policy, not the person. As they say that all the time, is because if Trump had governed to the left or even as a moderate, especially with the Supreme Court, if he had put in justices that were pretty far to the left, then people would be outraged and they'd be like, "Get him out of here," or they would turn on him in a second if he hadn't been such a hardliner on immigration, both in terms of how he speaks and what he's done, going after like the Muslim ban, things like that he tried to do. But they look at the policy and they say like, this is what we wanted. And then the person is kind of the problem. But then if he tones that down just enough, it becomes less of a problem, and then it's like, cool, they can make that policy argument. So it's really, like as Kyle said, just getting him to tone that down enough. So he doesn't have to be presidential. He doesn't have to be highly articulate, professional all the time. He just has to be not a jerk, for a few minutes long
that's right.
to make that argument. And that's enough. That's enough for the right these days, because they've been so starved, I would argue, for policy that is in line with what they want, and they've finally gotten it from him. That's just the feeling. So it's just gonna be interesting to see if that's enough. I asked that question obviously on our page, so I'm gonna go to some of the comments and get your reactions. We'll look at Damien here, who said, "I find it strange that there can be people who haven't decided which of these two they'll support. I can only imagine that number is quite small. I'm sure there are many who are deciding to either not vote at all or vote third party." So we're going to get into that. But that someone hasn't decided if it's Trump or Biden, I just can't imagine it. In any case, he seems to agree with you, Kyle. He says, "I think Trump wins. What a shock to the system it will be for Democrats if it's not even close." I want to talk first about this whole enthusiasm thing. Because, again, John and I were talking about this on Conservatism on Tap. I was making comparisons, and tell me if I'm off here, Chris, but I remember in 2012 just the lack of enthusiasm for Mitt Romney, because conservatives like myself saw it as this guy doesn't really inspire us. We don't really think that he's going to enact all the policies that we want, but we thought he was better than Obama, I guess. And so there just wasn't anybody out there campaigning hard for him. I think we may have seen him in some ways similar to the way many liberals see Kamala Harris, right? As someone who's more institutional and not quite doesn't have the ideology that we want. And so the enthusiasm was just so, I remember like being in Virginia and voting, and I was just like, man, no one here is inspired. And even people for the left at the time, like they were just kind of voting for Obama. It wasn't quite as, inspiring as it was the first time when, hey, like we get to vote for a black president. Now it's just like, hey, we're reelecting one. But there was still more than enough enthusiasm for Obama to win. So I just got to ask you about that. So you're talking about in California, you see some of that, you feel some of that enthusiasm, you're campaigning. Is that pervasive across the left? Is there enough enthusiasm, either A, from Biden himself, or B, from anti-Trump, resentment to propel him to victory, or that it's going to be pervasive for liberals?
I think it's negative enthusiasm, which is powering the left in this election. And I think that's why we're seeing the turnout that we are seeing. People want Trump out. People want to defeat what they see as a rise in fascism and the real just dismantling of our democratic institutions. Now, whether you think that's over the top or not, a lot of people seem to see it that way. And it is what is motivating us to vote. A lot of people voted third party in 2016. Because they thought that the election was essentially a foretold story, that Hillary was destined to win. She was, chosen and anointed by the left, and that Trump didn't have a chance. We know better now. My mom voted third party in 2016. Actually, I think she wrote in Bernie Sanders. She's not doing that this year, and it's not because she loves Biden. it's because she sees that as a mistake and as a risk of getting 4 more years of Trump. I do want to say, I'm in California. I am in probably the most conservative part of California, which is the Central Valley.
Yeah.
Devin Nunes signs everywhere in my area. I'm kind of out near the country. I did have a great interaction with right-leaning person that I met at a birthday party I was at today, where he was asking about, because I was saying I had to leave a little bit earlier so I could do this show, and he was asking what's the show about.
Yeah.
And I hate talking politics with people I don't know very well, but I mentioned it's me and a libertarian and a conservative. And we both kind of bonded over the fact that we did both vote for Gary Johnson in 2012. But that was a very low stakes election. That was, as you say, Romney versus Obama.
Right.
No one was very enthused. It wasn't like 2008 where everyone was super excited to vote for the first black president. In 2016 was very different. But at the same time, people just thought it was foretold. People thought it was in the bag. I don't think people see that this year. I think it's a very good election year.
That's an interesting point. I think so. You may not hear this argument too often, but one of the things for conservatives, and I don't think they're thinking this way, but I certainly am, is let's say that they reelect Trump, but they lose the Senate, right? Now you've got Trump, but what does he have the ability to affect if the Senate and the House are both solid Democrat, right? Like, it's going to be just a perpetual state of gridlock, for years, at least 2, right? Probably 4 years of gridlock of him not being able to. I mean, he won't be able. Let's say that there is another vacancy in the Supreme Court. He won't be able to get his nominee through because he'll need the Senate to do that. He won't be able to do what he's doing with Bennett right now. So could be a whole different side of like Trump, the ineffectual president, like over the next couple of years. So even if they get Trump the way they want, if they lose the Senate, which they're not talking about enough. It's like if you're voting for policy and all this stuff, you're like, if you don't have Congress, that's really the source of a lot of policy. Are you going to vote on executive orders? At which point, could have vetoes and things. So the whole policy argument, I think I struggle with, and I don't think they've put enough focus on the actual, what do you need to affect policy and which specific policy. So I always have that one. So I think that could be a struggle, for conservatives who happen to be thinking that way. I just don't think that they are. I want to ask you about this, Kyle, like from the libertarian side, what's your sense for those voters? Because you think about like government spending. I posted this on our page several times. I mean, Trump has increased government spending immensely. I'm looking here at a report from a think tank that says that spending has grown almost $800 billion since 2016. Okay, and that's before even COVID-19. Obviously, there's been immense spending for COVID-19, but even before then, Trump was not frugal, and he spent an enormous on entitlements and things like that. He said that when he was running, that he really wasn't going to touch that. The government spending has increased immensely. Obviously, regulations. Trump uses a lot of regulations to get what he wants done. But, Chris is talking about people wanting Trump out. Is that confined to liberals, or are there moderates and libertarians who want him out because he's violated so many of their principles as well?
Well, I think there are plenty of third-party folks, libertarians, who don't like Trump on any number of issues. You could talk about religious liberty, you could talk about gun rights, you could talk about deficit spending and government spending in general, on entitlements and anything else under the sun. You talk about the abuse of executive orders. There are a lot of issues with which libertarians and other independents might take issue with Trump. The difference is, I guess the issue, what it comes down to is, are they worse than what Joe Biden would do, or are they worse than what Joe Biden has proposed or would happen under a Democrat president? Yeah. And unfortunately, I think in most of those cases, Trump comes out a winner. Not on every case, but I'd say on the issues I'd say that matter most to libertarians, because ultimately, yes, the government's going to spend a lot of money. They're going to spend a lot of money anyway. I guess the question that is going to come down to is, do you want the government in your life more or less? And under Obama, under a Biden presidency, under Kamala Harris administration, the government's going to be running your life in innumerable ways more than it is right now. So for libertarians like me, that is a deciding issue for sure.
Do you have a response for that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, if you are an immigrant or a woman seeking an abortion or an LGBT person joining the military or, someone who has a relative from one of the countries on the Muslim travel ban, then the government is more in your life now. The government is more in your life now if you are a welfare recipient who has to jump through more hoops to get a basic level of service from the government. As far as government spending, we've seen under the last two Democratic presidents that the deficit has actually gone down. We had a surplus under Clinton, and under the last two Republican presidents, Trump and Bush, the deficit has escalated. So, yes, both parties spend a lot of money. The question, I've always seen it as neither party is really against government spending. They just want to spend government money on what they want to do. So, I don't necessarily buy the argument that uh, the left is more irresponsible with government spending because the results over the past 30 years just don't show that.
Well, so one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Chris, was do you think that the far left of the party, and I don't even know if it's far left now, but the Bernie Sanders movement, AOC, the outright socialist or the Democratic socialist, do you think that they're going to have a heavy hand in a Biden administration? Let me just, and then I have a follow up to that. But what role do you see them? Let's say that he wins. What role do you see them playing? Big, small, like somewhere in the middle?
I would say somewhere in the middle. I think it's important to note that that is the wing of the party that Joe Biden defeated in the primary. And I think Joe Biden is going to govern in a way that his voters gave him a mandate for.
Yeah.
And his voters are not necessarily in the Bernie and AOC wing. Yes, there's Kamala Harris in there, who is a lot more liberal than Biden. So I do think there will be some kind of compromise there. And I think the logic that you have to vote Trump to stop the far left ignores Trump's role in exacerbating the
Yeah.
far left.
Wait, so
Biden himself said Trump is someone who pours fuel on every fire. So if you want to look at which of these candidates can be a moderating force and uniting force, Joe Biden certainly has had his moments, but it's nothing close to the daily stream from Trump. I think that the answer is very clear that if you want a more moderate country and a country with less strife and division,
yeah.
the answer is clear.
So this would be my question. So let's say that, like you were advising Joe Biden, right? And he has to choose his VP. Would you have advised him to go with a more moderating force in Kamala Harris, more of an establishment, someone that I know? I have many friends on the far left, and they don't like her at all, right? They see the number of people that she's put in prison for nonviolent offenses, all this stuff. They don't like her at all. Would you have chosen something like that in order to preserve that argument of, hey, we're the moderating, like back to normal type force, or would you have picked someone like AOC, like to be on your ticket, or even Bernie Sanders himself, like which with the belief that, hey, they're going to call us a socialist anyway, we might as well have a socialist on the ticket and fire at the base the way that say that McCain did with Sarah Palin or whatnot. Which one would you have gone down personally? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't have gone as far as AOC or Bernie Sanders. I admired both of them in many ways, but I think that would have been a turnoff to many people who are those moderate swing voters that Joe Biden needed. My personal favored choices for VP were Elizabeth Warren, who is in many ways very far left, not quite as much as Bernie and AOC, and she may have turned off just as many people. Or Pete Buttigieg, who is in many ways more moderate than Kamala Harris, and would have been a fun poke in the eye to be a follow up to Mike Pence. But I think that he balanced it pretty well, and I think Biden's strategy throughout this campaign has been really strong, and I think the results show that. As you say, Kamala Harris has a lot of negatives. She's got a lot of positives. They almost end up canceling each other out because you can't paint her as this far left socialist because of her prosecution record. You can't paint her as too right wing because of her liberal voting record. So it's kind of like the I guess, campaign. Like, it's hard to really pin down
True.
what exactly it is.
Yeah.
But I think he, in general, has used that to his advantage.
Yeah, I mean, again, it reminds me of Paul Ryan. That was the whole argument for him too. Is like it was this. You can't say he's an idiot because he knows so much about policy. Even if you disagree with him, he's all into this. He studies it, and everything else, and he's been at the center of it, and all these things. And maybe it helped the Romney ticket a little bit, but it certainly wasn't enough to like bridge the enthusiasm gap. So it's just going to be interesting to see like how Trump voters are going to show up. Like that's just a given. Is it going to be as much as 2016? I don't know. Maybe not. Could be about the same. I know Kyle thinks it's probably going to be more. The question is going to be, do Democratic voters show up? I think that is how the election gets decided. Is like, do they show up? Because Republican voters did not show up for Mitt Romney. They just did not show
Can
up.
I mean, let me throw this out there. How are we calling Kamala a moderate? She is, according to GovTracker, which is a nonpartisan organization, they've ranked her the most liberal senator in the United States Senate. In fact, the Nora O'Connell, whatever her name is, on 60 Minutes actually said, "You are considered the most liberal United States senator." To which Kamala Harris just kind of giggled and laughed because that's what she does when she's put on the spot. Like, how are we still under the idea or the I don't know, how are we still considering her a moderate by any stretch of the imagination? She supports the Green New Deal. She supports Medicare for all. Those are not moderate. Those are not moderate or kind of moderate liberal opinions.
Yeah. What would you say to that, Chris? And then I'll give you my answer in a minute.
Yeah, I thought it was good of that interviewer to press her on that. I was watching that just before we did this show, and yeah, you're right. She had no response. As I said, I think that her prosecutorial record is really what stops many from seeing her as a left-wing extremist, despite her voting record, which is very liberal. The positions she supported during the primary, which were very liberal. In that same interview, she basically didn't necessarily renounce her support for the Green New Deal or Medicare for all, but said that she would support whatever Biden goes with. And it kind of made me question, like, what is the point of interviewing, a vice president? We saw Pence interviewed by Leslie Stahl right after Trump was, and his job was just to kind of be the normal one in the room and talk up Trump and not answer any questions. And that was exactly Kamala's role when she was interviewed after Biden. So I think, it's sad to say it, Kamala is a bit of an opportunist, and I think you can kind of safely say her position will be the position that she thinks is going to win, and the position that Biden asks her to take, despite her very liberal voting record.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with that. Like, it's her time as Attorney General of California. That's where people see her doing things that outraged the left, right? Like in terms of different policies.
And they should. I mean, there's a lot of things to be outraged about. She's enforced, drug laws and three strike laws, things that were, written by Joe Biden. And there's multiple cases where she's withheld evidence against minorities, against black men who are on trial for different things. She's a terrible candidate. She's a terrible prosecutor. Opportunistic to the core, and I guess that's okay because she's a politician. But
yeah.
Overall, I thought she was a terrible choice. I still think she's a terrible choice.
I guess that's my point. Is I see her as an establishment style candidate, someone who knows how to work the system to get where she wants to be, as opposed to the purist ideologue types of Bernie Sanders and more AOC.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was saying is. Is there an opportunity cost there that's been lost? Because that would certainly fire them up. And I don't know, going back to Damien's comment, I just don't know how much there is a middle ground there who's swayed by the whole moderating force argument, as opposed to this large part of left that says, hey, if they're going to paint us as socialist anyway, we might as well choose whatever candidate is going to get us most inspired. And like you're saying, Phil, I don't see her inspiring all that many. I don't think she hurts the ticket, but I don't think she necessarily fires up anyway. But hey, maybe there's enough of the whole like anti-Trump,
might be
out there to fire them up. We'll see. So I do want to get to talking about, we've mentioned third parties and things like that. We do have an opportunity to interview Brian Carroll, who is running in a third party called the American Solidarity Party. So we reached out to him about a week ago. I saw him on a couple other programs, and I was like, this would be fun to talk to. And really, what I want to ask him about is just this notion of discussion and debate. And obviously, we got that a little bit more in the second debate. But it just seems like when we're going through this nomination process and we're going through the primaries and things, that there's all this discussion, and you have, like we've been talking about, Bernie Sanders going up against Biden and everybody else. Kamala Harris was in that. On the Republican side, back when Trump first ran in 2016, you had Rand Paul was in there. You had, all these different candidates that come through, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Trump himself, Jeb Bush, and you had all these different belief systems. And it just feels like after that happens, like there is no discussion, especially on the right now. Like I've seen so many people who post, you are either with Trump or you are a rhino, right? Like Republican in name only. You are either with us or you're against us, and discussion ends. And there is no like second guessing of anyone. And one of the things that I see is a third party can cultivate some of that, can keep it going, right? So that it doesn't just end after nomination. I would love to see, even as someone who's like said many good things about Trump and supported many of his policies, I would still love to see more discussion and debate, and having a libertarian on the stage, with the debate, having someone like Brian Carroll on the stage, I think would be a great thing. So I'm going to get a chance to talk to him about that briefly. His whole platform is on what's called distributism, which is just the notion of he's in favor of local businesses as well as local government, and kind of reviving that. Is like we're going to talk about how so many people know who Trump is. They know who Mike Pence is. They know who Joe Biden is. They have no idea who their mayor is. They don't know who their city council is. They don't even know who like their governors are of their state or their state senators. And what a tragic loss that is, because America was really built on, the different states' rights and the diversity, amongst them. And someone like Brian, I think, appreciates that and is in favor of it, and doesn't stand any chance of winning. He's the first to admit that. But I just love the notion of having discussions and more diversity of thought that third party can bring, and we'd love to see that. So, any thoughts on that from you two guys about it?
Yeah, I think the rise of every issue being a federal issue has really been contributed to by the rise of social media, as well as the rise of the 24-hour news cycle before it. And I'm guilty of this. I don't pay attention to local politics really at all. Even state California politics are kind of something that I don't pay nearly enough attention to as national politics. And it's, when every issue is a national issue, when we see, videos of people acting crazy in a store, either because they're not wearing a mask and angry that someone told them to wear a mask, or angry that someone told them to stop wearing a mask, and that becomes something that everyone in the country sees, that's not good for our democracy. It creates so much division on a national level. It puts us into these two-party tribal identities, rather than more local politics don't necessarily have that effect. So it's definitely something that's been very toxic, and having healthy third parties to compete with the two-party system would, I think, definitely be something that could help that. And the question I would have for Brian Carroll is, what does he think can be done to make third parties stronger in this country, other than just telling people, hey, you can vote third party? Like that, those reminders haven't seemed to really do much.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, what systemic changes he thinks could be made
I'll ask
to make third parties competitive.
I'll ask him. And one of the other people that's run for president that I definitely respect and have done some videos on is Andrew Yang, right? Trying to bring in the whole notion of universal basic income and trying to get that belief system to be normalized. Not necessarily something that I fully agree with. We've done videos on it trying to dissect, but it's an interesting solution to so many of the problems that are out there. And someone like Andrew would probably say, like, hey, if we can just get some of these ideas into the mainstream, that's good. Even if the third party itself doesn't start. Obviously, he did try to do that within the Democratic Party, and had a little bit of success, but probably was hoping for more. But I'll certainly ask him. How about you, Kyle? I'll give you a comment on this, and then the last word as well.
Yeah, sure. Distribution is pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean, I remember in some of our earlier discussions on this show, I talked about the need for everyone to reject the idea that national politics was the answer for everything. That you are much more likely to be affected in just on your daily life by things that happen on the state and the local levels. And so I'm lockstep with him on that. I'm not quite sure about the economics of his of distributionism. But as far as kind of decentralizing, power from the federal government into the state and local governments, I love that. I'm on board with that for sure.
Yeah, and he's big on pro-life, which I know like it's something we talked about. Is Jorgensen was not, and that was kind of a stumbling block for both of us with her. It's gonna be interesting, but so we've got that coming up this week, and then of course we got the election. Like I said, is just a week and a half out. So I'd love to have you guys on for that. We'll probably do a longer episode. Then we'll have John on here from Conservatism on Tap. Maybe have you guys subbing in and out. Probably do about a 3 or 4 hour show just as we get the results. We've been talking about this for months and months. It's been awesome with you guys, just like getting your thoughts down, and as things change, it's going to be incredible to see the actual results from it. So I can't wait. So for those of you watching, we're going to do that show live. But make sure in between then and now, take a look at our website, theburkingconservative.com. Take a look at our Facebook page, the Burking Conservative, there, as well as YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. We're all on. Feel free to send us a message if you have topics or comments that you want us to talk about. We'll be happy to pull them up here on here. If you've got folks that you think that we should interview, so obviously we'll have Brian this week, but if you've got other folks, we can reach out to them for sure. And we're always happy to have those contributions on the show. And as you can see, a diversity of perspectives always makes a lot more fun. So with that, Chris, I'll give you your last word, and then we'll be done. Go for it, brother.
Biden 2020. I don't know what else to say.
Is there anything else you can say? Yeah, I think he's going to need it for that enthusiasm. I think he's going to need more. He's going to need more. He's going to need your signs plus a little more ringing endorsement. So we'll see if that does it. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
I think I just won in the election with that.
Have a good night.
You too.